Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where we talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the series premiere of The Midnight Club, a great series premiere. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, they kind of hit the... I think it's so interesting, because obviously I went into this having never read the book and or books that this is based on. This is my first introduction to the show. To this story. I went into this knowing the premise of like these are kids who are sick, which that's just a heart-wrenching situation, especially like obviously like Ilanka's story. We got that little bit of a build up. It's like cool, you're like getting about to give like a big speech at your school graduation. You and your friend go out, you're going to party at a college party, and just when it happens, it's like you and your entire world flips upside down. You had your entire life planned out, or at the very least you're like, okay, this is the next chapter of my life. I think it's very poetic that this first episode is called The Final Chapter, because it is a lot of these kids' final chapters, and especially for Ilanka, and I guess it's almost this interesting thing of the final chapter is kind of where the story begins. And I think that's, maybe I'm reading too much into that, but I think that's such an interesting thought to have. But once again, it just sucks. It's just that realization of like, man, like they're not kids. I mean, in comparison, their kids are like nearly half my age. But like, it's like, right, you're like 18, your entire life, like you should be living your entire life, and then you're like going through something like this. It's just one of those reminders of you're like, kid cancer is a thing. Why the hell does that happen? Why is that a thing? That sucks. That's terrible. Cancer is nothing anyone should ever have to go through, especially like at any point in life, whether you're older or younger. But it's even more of a travesty when you're younger, because I'm like, your entire life is kind of getting robbed from you, especially in Ilanka's case. She is someone that she's like, right, I've kind of faced it. I know what I like. She was like, I was the 2/10th of the 1% in my class and stuff like that. She's like, I'm willing to take those odds. 9 months later, she went through like some of the treatments and stuff like that. She's now 18, but it doesn't seem like any of it's sticking. And Tim is like, tell me, will she make it to 19? It's like, there's a good possibility. 20, the doctor got quiet. It's like, now it's like there's a ticking clock being like, no other treatments will do anything at this point in time. It's terminal. All they could do is make her stay as easy as possible. And so Ilanka isn't willing to give up, and she made Tim think she was, because I think for her it's like, if she tells Tim the truth of, oh, I'm going to this place because I read a story about a girl, Julia, who went here but miraculously got cured. If I told, like, she doesn't want to give him any false hope, and it's just, she doesn't want, because she knows if she tells him the truth, like, oh, he's going to think like, oh, you're here on a fool's errand. So she just makes it go like, hey, this is a place where people, specifically teenagers in my situation, go to make the choice of kind of, going out on their own terms. So, and obviously we get introduced to our rambunctious misfit cast, that being some very interesting people. Obviously, Anya seems like the meanest person there. Everyone else seems chillax. Sherry's the liar. Sandra's the super religious person. Spence seems cool. So is Amish. He wants to like fit in. And I love that whole bit where he was trying to like, oh, like, why didn't you guys do any hazing? He's like, yeah, I was here for 2 months, and like, no, I was like just the new kid jokes and stuff like that. He's like, yeah. Spence was like, yeah, hazing isn't a thing here. And he was like, oh, trying to trick Ilanka into going downstairs. But they were like, no, don't. Like with the elevator basement, they're like, don't do that. And it's like, why? It's like, that's the morgue. It's like, oh, yeah. You already got a ticking clock on top of your head. The last thing you need is more reminders of like, cool, when you ultimately die, that's probably where we're going to end. Like, you don't need that. And even Amish being like, you know what? Honestly, this is not the place to be hazing and messing around and stuff like that. And Spence kind of passed him like, yeah, he's like, honestly, I'm going to thank everyone, because he didn't realize it until now. It's like, yeah, what he was about to like put Ilanka through, he's like, yeah, that is actually super jacked up of me. And I'm so glad that there is no hazing here. We have Natsuki. We also have, Kevin, and, I feel like there's someone I'm missing. I feel like there was someone I was missing, but maybe not. I didn't bother counting, because I know there's 8 people in total. But it is interesting getting immediately knowing these characters, kind of knowing a little bit of their personalities. And once again, going back to Anya, just because she's so mean, and who knows if that's just like her defense mechanism of dealing with everything. I mean, everyone has their way of processing everything. I mean, especially once again, it's a lot, and even Dr. Satin says it. It's like these kids are dealing with something most adults will go their entire lives never having to deal with something this crazy, this painful, this trying and stuff like that. You know, such a heavy burden on them. But what I also thought was so interesting is before all this happened, uh, Ilanka was seeing stuff. Even before like her diagnosis, when she like spit up blood at that party, and before like she even got her diagnosis, she was at that party. She looked in the mirror and saw the creepy old lady, and she saw that lady multiple times. She's having visions of this place. Even like when she was first checking it out, she was having visions of that, like Kevin sitting on that chair, that seat that's like close to the cliff. It's like, she's like, have I met you? He's like, oh, were you here? And she's like, no, I've never been there. He's like, oh, then how would we know each other? I don't know whether he felt that too, or he just assumed because she knew him. It's like, oh, maybe we went to the same school together. But it's like, no, she's having visions of him. But it's like, what's that about? Like, because they can't that other people at that place have seen stuff. They specifically reference Rachel, who Alanka's filling that void for her. But why is it that Alanka's been having visions of this place? Like, it doesn't even seem like it's visions of like it seems like it is like a deja vu, because maybe on some level, and maybe this will be the twist we find out. Once again, I'm only watching these one episode at a time, but by the time you're hearing this, all of these should be recorded and out. But could it be that it has to be like you're definitely seeing the future thing, which I think ties in nicely with her monologue at the beginning, where she talks about people telling you like to move past the past, like the past is the past, like you need to kind of move on, turn the next page. But for her, it's like if the life should be your story to write, because if people telling you to turn to the next page means that it's already kind of written, you kind of like just everything that's happening is just meant to happen. You're just following the script before you. It's like that kind of makes it seem like everything's predetermined. So it feels like it's playing with that notion. It's like, right, so she's seeing the future, or maybe it's going to be once again that timey-wimey you think of. Well, it's the reason why it's deja vu, because it's already happened, and maybe they've all been through this before, but something got reset and she just doesn't remember. I'm already throwing out massive speculation, but that's just what I like to do about these certain things. So, because I wonder if it has any correlation with Rachel. Obviously, Anya's like, yeah, Rachel was kind of crazy at the end there, hearing things. The fact is, I mean, out of anyone, she loves messing with Sandra the most, because Sandra's like it's like, well, like even if she's a Wiccan or whatever, the fact is the Lord will forgive her. It's like, hey man, if Rachel is a heretic, then I'm going straight to hell. It's like, I love how like blunt and kind of mean Anya could be. But like I said, I don't know if that's an overcompensation, or I also love, my favorite one is probably like Sherry, because she's a pathological liar. They're like, yeah, we know she rolled up in a place like with a nanny driving a Bentley, but or something like that. It's like a really expensive car, and they were like, yeah, other than that, everything that comes out of her mouth, take it with a grain of salt, because she's always changing her story. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I'm like, where does that stem from? Like, kind of being a bit of a pathological liar. Where does that come from? But like I said, in general, like, they all seem chill enough. I mean, they're all respectively in the same situation of trying to make the most of, like, what time they have left. But it is also, like, this depressing angle to, like, this is the place where other teenagers have chosen to come and, you know, choose their end or whatever. But it's like, this place has been around for a very long time, and you see plenty of photos of everyone. It's like, oh, yeah, this particular class, was it the one of 66? Yeah, they all died. So it's like, cool. And even Spitz, when he was giving Ilanka the tour, he was like, "Oh yeah, the dude who gave me this tour, like, yeah, he's gone now too." He's like, "Jesus, that's depressing," because it just feels like that place is reeked with death. I mean, I don't know, but I guess like when you have a ticking clock on like, you don't think about it too much, because I mean, maybe it's because you think about it all the time to the point it means nothing anymore. I don't know. Because they obviously, like, they talk about death so casually, but it's like when you kind of have a death stamp and you just feel like it's all meaningless, it's all going to end one way or another, then that's all you kind of have for you. I don't know. I just thought it's heartbreaking and sad and depressing, you know? But I think trying to find that little nugget of enjoyment at the end, it's kind of like all you can hope for in a situation, considering all their circumstances are, well, terminal. So I even love the whole thing about like, oh yeah, like Spence kind of hates Mark, which Mark is played by Zach Gilford. I was like, oh, that's so interesting. I saw his name. I was like, is Zach Gilford who I think it is? It's like, yeah, that's Riley from Midnight Mass. I have to look it up because I meant to look it up. The actress who plays Sandra isn't the same. She's one of the kids from one of like the main kids from the daughter from God, Midnight Mass as well. I don't think that's the same actress, but I could be mistaken. I'm not sure. I think I saw a glimpse of this somewhere. I didn't know this because I'm not that well versed in the horror world. Duke, I'll probably look into it later, or you can correct me in the comments down below if I don't remember to. I have to look it up, but I believe the actress who plays Dr. Stanton is like kind of a horror person too. I think, if I'm not mistaken, she's from maybe the OG Nightmare on Elm Street like movie. I think she's like the main. I don't know if she's like the final girl or not, but like I think that's good because I think I saw her name come up. I guess because maybe she's doing press for this show that she's like, oh, she'd like to go up against Freddy Krueger one more time. Which is, once again, just Netflix connection wise, if that is the person I think it is, I'm not well versed enough in the Nightmare on Elm Street movies like that to remember that. Obviously, I know Robert Englund, but that's about it. Which, you know, speaking of Robert Englund, the connection I was about to say is like, oh yeah, it's interesting considering like season 4 of Stranger Things had kind of the Freddy thing going on, plus literally Freddy himself, Robert Englund, was in the season 2, so it's like, you know, interesting thoughts. The point I was making before I went on my huge tangent was I love that Spence, they're like, oh, why does Spence hate Mark? It's like, well, he's healthy, he's handsome, he's funny. What's not to hate? Oh, he's also not dying, so it's just kind of a reminder of like, cool, you're around all of the sick kids, but you get to go home and not have to worry about it because, like, yeah, when we die, it's like, you're still going to be alive, and it's just kind of like, I don't know. I guess he just rubs Spitz in particular the wrong way. Either way. But I do love that, obviously, we get introduced to the Midnight Club situation that kind of got going on. It isn't something that this group of kids started. It's actually a tradition that's been started. Who knows how old it is, but it's been passed down from different group to different group. Because some of the groups, they're only, like, because there's some traditions and stuff like that. I'm really curious, like, what are the crossovers between the different groups? Because, you know, once again, using the reference of, like, oh, everyone in from the class of 66 are dead, right? I mean, granted, it's been, like, less than 30, probably 28 years, because it's like 28, 27, because it's like, I think 90, it's 93 or 94. At the beginning of the series, obviously a little more time passes with the 9 months with Alanka, but I don't know how many crossovers there are between the different groups, like how many people are usually crossovered at a time, because I want to say, because the people who've been here the longest are Anya and someone else. Was it Sandra? I want to say Anya and Sandra are the ones who've been there the longest. They've both been there like 6 months. So, and once again, going back to that line from Spence where he was like, yeah, one of the people that was here previously looked after him. And obviously even using Rachel, for example, being gone as well. But they gather around and kind of almost do like a Are You Afraid of the Dark type of thing of like, oh, let's gather around and tell some like spooky stories. It was Natsuki's turn. And I love that Ahmed, like, I love how she handled that. It's like, it's so, because if I'm not mistaken, it's on Netflix. I want to say it was like their community channel, community tab on their YouTube channel. Apparently, I think this show has gotten the world record for the most jump scares or something like that. I just saw it pop up like a week or so, like probably like a couple of days after the show like originally dropped. But I didn't look into that too much. But I mean, that story Natsuki told is enough to be like, because I know a lot of people hate jump scares because they do think jump scares are super cheap scares. It's not like, you know, it's like, oh, those are super cheap and like, you know, it's almost cheating getting someone with a jump scare. So that's what kind of aggravates, like, I think horror fans about it. At least that's kind of what I've heard. I just thought that was such an interesting thing, like her story, and it's just like, it is creepy, and I do appreciate, I was like, oh, so how the story is going to be handled? It's like, okay, so the characters from the Midnight Club themselves are like, they're kind of doing reenactments of the stories Because like using the "Are you afraid of the dark?" like line, like none of them included the actual kids, like the kids telling the stories. The stories didn't include them; they were different people. So it's interesting to see that the cast of these stories will be made up and comprised of the Midnight Club. So I thought that was kind of a neat thing. Also, it also helps you. I mean, I think on one level, one keeps the casting down, so you don't have to get that wide variety of a cast. You get to just use the same cast over and over again, so you don't have to hire more people. So I think it makes it easier on that front. But also, I think from a storytelling purpose, it makes it that much more relatable. Like that these stories that they're telling amongst themselves, that they themselves are kind of being cast in it. It plays into it thematically, in my opinion. But I love that it's just like unnecessary screams and not skill, like messing with everyone. And then just like, it's like, cause Spence tried to call out being like, oh, that's just startling or whatever. And then it's like, boom, she scares everyone. Sandra falls out her chair. She was scared so much. And then you add on the fact is that she's crawling on a table like a cat and she's scaring the shit out of Amesh. And she starts screaming. He's screaming. And then in the story, there's like ghosts everywhere. Just like, scream, 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 scream. I'm like, I love how ridiculous that got. But obviously, they find out about Ilanka having like followed Anya there, and so she wants to join in, and so Anya's like, yo, you need to like take a drink and you need to tell a story. So she tells one of taking the Julia story. At first I was like, the way she was telling, I was like, Julia, isn't that the girl who was like, okay. So she included some truth, but also spun her own tale in it. And it seems like the only person who knew what she was doing is Kevin, because the others never really take time. It's like, yeah, there's all these photos around, but no one's ever really taken stock or notice of the people who were here. He saw one of the photos and saw Julia's name, so he knew immediately like what Ilanka was doing. But it was a really interesting story. Like she went there, like, very, very similar to Ilanka, obviously even having thyroid cancer. I mean, that's how Ilanka found out about her story, was about looking up thyroid cancer. So now it's a situation of she's telling this story, and I thought was so interesting of like her getting focused on a date over and over and over again, kind of her own expiration date. But then what was it that she did? She did something and ended up disappearing for like a month, and then reappeared and her diagnosis was clear. But the problem is now she can see when people die, which immediately my brain went like, oh, she's got Shikigami eyes now. If you don't know, I'm referencing Death Note. The Shikigami, death gods in that universe, have special eyes where they can see how much time someone has left in their lifespan before they just naturally, whatever it may be, whatever is going to be their cause of death. It's like, oh, specifically when someone's going to die. And she never got specific with times, just the dates and stuff. But that is something Ilanka came up with just to kind of creepify the story. And it turns out the three people, she was like, hey, this person is this date, this date, this date for this person. All three of them did die. But because she was no longer able to see her own expiration date, but other people's now. So I even love how she played a little hardball too. It's like, oh, she's like, I'm not going to finish this story until you like tell me what's that one main thing about the Midnight Club. The point is for them, and I didn't know that this was their main goal. I think eventually they're all going to be on board with Ilanka's goal, but right now their goal is like, right, when one of us dies, whoever dies first has to do their best to reach over from the other side of the veil and try and speak to us so we know what to expect when it comes to death, because obviously death is like the biggest mystery of, well, what happens next, Are you going like, is there such thing as heaven? Which I want to believe that there's a heaven, just because I'm like, the notion that it's just all darkness, that it's just nothingness is too depressing. Whether it's the whole notion of like heaven from Supernatural, where it's like, hey, you get to relive your life in kind of this paradise, and you can relive moments in your life, like I don't know, like or whether it's a more traditional like, oh, like pearly gates, wings, angels flying in a cloud type of thing, just anything other than just pure darkness. I feel like that's just too nihilistic and depressing. So I would want there to be a little more pizzazz to the afterlife in that regard. But so it's like, right, they want answers of like, yeah, what can we expect? Because I think at least knowing what comes next, you can kind of prepare. Like, I guess your expectations are like, okay, cool. Oh, so that's That's what it's like, having a definitive answer, especially when death is coming for all of them just at different points in time. So I love that. And Lanka was like, I swear I'm going to do everything I can to scream, reach through, and just yell till you guys can hear me. And Anya's like, Jesus, you don't have to be such a drama queen about it. So. But like I said, Ilanka's come here for the purpose of trying to find a cure. She told that there's bits about Julia's story that's true, but it's only the whole aspect of, hey, she did come here, she did disappear, but it was only for a week, and she came back remission. The whole, like, seeing people as death date was something Ilanka came up with. You know, once again, you tell a good story by, you tell a good lie by secreting some crumbs of truth, you know? That makes the lie a little more believable to some extent, because it's like, right, this isn't someone you had to come up with her backstory. It was already there. You just added your own flair to the story. And obviously, I guess, you know, it's the 90s, so tracking someone down on the internet's not as easy as it was today. So she didn't find much more about Julia. She's like, I don't know if she's still out there, fine. But it's like, right, she walked away cured, and I'm going to do the same thing. So once again, I get it's so interesting that she is coming at this from a perspective of hope, where Kevin just kind of like, okay, cool. You know, I don't know whether he's just kind of like, I guess he doesn't want to, like, everyone finds their way through this is kind of the whole point, because that was the whole thing of like, yeah, like Rachel had the whole Wiccan thing and she had like a pentagram underneath her bed. So it's like, yeah, let everyone find their thing that kind of helps them, you know, find their way through this at the end. So I think that's why Kevin didn't really say anything. He's like, okay. So kind of leave things at that. But we have that darkness falling at the end there. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I was so curious also to see like the structure of the show, but knowing like, right, it's going to be a blurring of both realities of like, right, here's the stories you're telling, but while you're telling the stories, like some really scary, spooky horror stuff is also going to be happening to you in real life. So like bouncing between the two is definitely going to be interesting to see like, how far we're going to get into the show where it's no longer going to be the stories they're telling and it's purely just going to be like the darkness, the chaos, and just all the horror happening to them outside of the stories. Like, when will it stop being kind of like a balance? Because right now I'd say it's like probably entering the territory of, I'd say it's still 50-50-ish right now, because we've seen more, like especially with Ilanka, the whole situation of she's seeing stuff, but then like obviously this episode, that was kind of a chunk of the episode, but also like the story themselves being told are kind of a chunk of the episode. And I think it's probably going to be an interesting percentage, like as we go forward, it's like less and less of the stories appear in the episode and more about the actual ghost and stuff haunting, which you know, and all the darkness and all the spooky stuff. But I think it's interesting too, because you know, these stories, what was that line from Natsuki about, like, yeah, it gives birth to, like, ghosts or something like that? I thought that was kind of an interesting line that I feel like probably will be true, because, like, the more they tell these stories, plus some other stuff I do remember from the trailer are going to come up, I think, amplifying those stories and making that, you know, more supernatural side really affect them outside of the story. Either way, very great, like I said, first episode, nice introduction to everything and everyone, and I'm very, very interested to see where the next episode takes us going forward with all of this. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.